everyone. My name is Shannon Hogue, and I am the Global Head of Solutions Engineering at Karat. And for those of you who don't know me just yet, my entrance into tech was anything but traditional. I didn't grow up around a major tech hub, nor did I go to a top-tier computer science school or any university for that matter. So picture me, a young girl from Chicago in the 80s, upstairs in my bedroom, taking apart and putting back together my Atari console for fun. And for all the millennials here, Atari was a thing before PlayStation or Nintendo, and it was amazing. This was anything but normal for a girl at that time. And yet there I was, immersing myself in hobbies that would later become a lifelong career. Now, while I was in high school, I taught myself how to code. And then after I graduated, I was offered a tech job that would pay more money than my family had ever seen. And so I got in my old 87 Dodge Shadow that broke down quite a bit, and I drove myself out to San Francisco from Chicago, and I started my career as a developer. And I started writing software and did pretty well doing contract work for companies like Logitech and Excite at Home. And eventually I found myself doing some management consulting. I was hired by companies that were having trouble delivering and their product just wasn't moving forward. So maybe they had senior developers that had left the company, or they were potentially hiring the wrong people, but whatever the issue was, their business had stalled. And so I would go in, I'd do an assessment, I'd make a bunch of changes, hire some new developers potentially, and was pretty successful. And eventually I was hired into my dream job. And at that point, I pretty much thought I was Superwoman, which I'm sure that some of you can relate to. Now, I got brought into the company by a CTO, Al Alcorn, and that was a really huge deal for me. Al is the inventor of Pong, one of the original Atari games and one of my personal favorites. And so I'm in my early career and I'm working for my idol. I should have been intimidated, but I wasn't, because Superwoman, right? And I dove right in. I was excited. I brought a new architect in. I made a bunch of changes. I mean, everything had been written in Perl. They were using the free version of MySQL and dumping, gigabits into the database, and things were crashing for 8 to 10 hours. Seemed like an easy win, right? So we did. We fixed it. We pulled the bits out of the database. We purchased some Blade servers. Yes, I just said Blade servers. And we moved to modern languages, because even back then, you couldn't hire developers that wrote Perl to help you out. Now, fast forward a few months and everything is working better. No more 8-hour outages. Customers were happy. We could hire developers at scale. But the old architect, he didn't think so. He was really good friends with CEO and Al, and he goes to Al and he's like, she's doing it wrong. And it's okay. I mean, we were like, okay, we have everything covered. 8-hour outages not happening anymore. And so they decided to put us all in a room to figure it out. And the very first question that Al asked was, so you're saying it's faster? Show me. Show me the measurements. Show me your metrics. Yeah, my heart sank. I had nothing. I had no monitoring. I had no metrics, no measurements in place. We were just going and going and going, to trying to fix the problem and fixing problems. So whatever office politics there may have been in play, it didn't matter. All of my team's great work didn't matter. I had failed. I didn't have what I needed. I failed me, I failed my team, and I failed my chance to build an incredible relationship with someone that I looked up to. And so I left thinking that I needed to do something different. And so I started prioritizing monitoring and working at companies like New Relic and making monitoring and optimization my next step. Now, I worked my way back up to engineering leadership, and I kept building teams. And I even tackled my team structure and organization like I would with architectures as a consultant. I was always trying to optimize every little piece of it to make sure that we were able to hit delivery and deployment targets ahead of schedule. But the more that my teams delivered and the faster that we grew, the harder it was to balance the growth, especially with interviewing, with the delivery. Interviewing for growth was cannibalizing my team's ability to deliver. And then I came across Karat. So I want to give a little bit of quick backstory on Karat. I always promise this, and it's true. This is not an infomercial, but it's really helpful context. Our co-founders, Jeff and Mo, they were trying to find a way to unlock opportunities by improving the broken hiring processes. Mo was actually dealing with the same problems that I was as an executive on the Microsoft Xbox team. He just couldn't find enough engineering time interviews needed to hit his hiring targets. Now, it turns out that that's a problem that many of you can probably relate to, especially if you're a fast growing company. It can be a full time job to keep up with all of the interviews that your team requires. And I'm sure folks in this room have seen examples of this firsthand, but making your team spend their time interviewing as opposed to building software is a huge drain, both from a financial and a morale standpoint. And this is something that we heard from the majority of engineering leaders that we surveyed last year. And the problem is that a lot of organizations are just really bad at interviewing. Without consistent, high quality interviews, it's impossible for leaders to identify sources of bias in their process, which is more important than ever as businesses are not just continuing to make commitments around building more inclusive teams, but recognizing that they can no longer afford to miss out on diverse talent, especially in the current market. And this isn't just limited to engineering teams. Interviewing is a problem everywhere because it isn't anybody's job. And so that's what Karat helps solve, and why I joined the team as head of solutions engineering. That or the fact that I had a chance to buy another gaming console vet, and I had to jump on it, of course. Now, Karat has created the Interviewing Cloud. It's a human and tech solution where we interview on behalf of leading companies with on-demand delivery of engineering interviews virtually with unlimited capacity. And it's my job to make sure that every technical interview we conduct is aligned to the right job description and hiring bar, but also, and most importantly, that those interviews are predictive, fair, and enjoyable. Now, for me, Karat is exactly where I need to be because as a woman from a non-traditional background in tech, I've had my share of interview horror stories. I can't say how many opportunities that I've missed out on because I don't have a top 10 computer science school on my resume. But I can say that I've experienced interviewers walk into a room and look at my resume and say, oh my gosh, I must be in the wrong room. Or I've even had a few developers interview for a role on my team ask me out. So working for a company that's trying to make hiring more efficient and equitable is something that really speaks to me on a personal level. Essentially, I'm doing the same kind of consulting that I was for architecture and infrastructure, but I'm now focusing on building engineering teams. And today, I'm going to share what I've learned from over 130,000 interviews conducted on behalf of the fastest growing and largest enterprises. So, what problem does Karat solve? Well, there's a multi-decade shortage of software engineers. Even before the pandemic, every company and industry was turning to software, and that shortage is getting worse because digital transformation is accelerating. In a remote first world, candidates are now being targeted by companies that never would have reached out before, and companies are trying to hire more inclusively. Now, all of this means that streamlining and accelerating hiring really has become a business imperative, especially for tech talent. Now, on top of the imperative to find and retain great engineering talent, the importance of DEI in hiring has only increased. Karat conducted some research across 300 Black computer science students at historically Black colleges and universities to better understand the unique challenges they face starting careers in technology, which also informs all of us can change our approach to increase the diversity of our workforces. When Karat launched our Brilliant Black Minds program, it started with a clear premise that we believe there is an access gap for Black engineers. That gap materializes through a lack of access to a professional network in tech, access to interview practice, and access to interview feedback. So let's talk a little bit more about these. Now, the first gap materializes early, which is why early exposure to computer science and CS is key. Often, Black software engineers are already behind their peers due to a lack of exposure to people in tech at an early stage in their development. And who you know matters. 75% of Black CS students knew fewer than 5 people in big tech, and that lack of access to networks becomes evident in early stage of early career exploration. And all of this creates this compounding interview anxiety. What makes this such a critical issue is that the same hiring process that creates this anxiety can use this anxiety as a way of disqualifying you as a candidate, which creates a status quo feedback loop. In the same way that the negatives of the access gap are compounding in nature, the positive solutions can be too. And I'm going to share more stats about that now. All right, so networking does help. When Black CS students and big tech add big tech contacts to their network, they increase their chances of succeeding in a technical interview. Going from no contacts to just 10 or more increases their success rate by over 50%. Now, the second thing, practice builds confidence. When Black CS students have the opportunity to do practice technical interviews, we see a significant rate of improvement in their likelihood to succeed at a real technical interview. Just the first practice interview increases their likelihood to succeed by 30%, right? And 3 or more practice interviews more than double their success rate. Now, closing the access gap through practice helps engineers get jobs because practice interviews leads to greater success in real interviews. They also help Black CS students get internships. Black CS students who did 3 or more practice interviews were 6 times as likely to have an internship as those who didn't. So what are the practical things that you can do to close the access gap today in your hiring processes? You can make the interview process more transparent, letting candidates know ahead of time what to expect and how they'll be evaluated. You can create interview practice opportunities just by building this or a redo opportunity into your process. You'll increase your hiring yield by helping meet your DEI objective. And you can foster inclusion with support and structure. So keep your full hiring process as consistent as possible because that structure increases fairness. All right, so I'll quickly go through the tension between hiring objectives. Most companies that we work with are trying to meet 3 main hiring objectives at enterprise scale. They want to meet their hiring targets as quickly as possible. They want to maintain or raise their quality bar, and they want to hire as inclusively as possible. And on their own, most companies can achieve 1 or 2 of these things, but they have a hard time hitting all 3. And they oftentimes feel as if there's a trade-off between them. So for instance, meeting hiring often happens at the expense of quality, right? Or some people see DEI initiatives as added steps that slow down hiring. One industry survey shows that 59% of hiring managers said they don't have enough time to increase diversity in their hiring processes. But in reality, those are false trades. By leveraging the interview cloud, it's possible to achieve all 3. I want to tackle quickly the myth that equitable processes are less efficient. One of our innovations in the interview is something that we call the redo. And there's one thing that you take away today, we hope you use the redo. We offer every candidate a no questions asked chance to retake their interview if they felt that they did not showcase their best selves. And 15 to 20% of candidates take us up on this. And what's interesting is that Our data shows it's equally as effective in terms of hiring efficiency as the first interview candidates take, but you don't have additional sourcing. And these are likely candidates who you would have lost as false negatives. The redo is particularly effective for two cohorts, senior candidates and those from underrepresented backgrounds. So here you get a higher hiring yield, 17% increase, and a more inclusive hiring process. There does not need to be a trade-off between hitting hiring goals and quality. Now, normally we find the inverse relationship between candidate quality and close rates. The candidate who perform the best are the hardest to close. This makes sense because they typically have the most competing offers. What we found is that the relationship breaks those candidates interview within 72 hours of getting invited. The most competitive candidates need to move the quickest, and they respect companies who have efficient processes. Now, candidates who interview within 72 hours is twice as likely to get hired as those who interviewed 7 to 14 days out. So here, speed and interview capacity drives up quality. Now, you don't have to make a trade-off between quality and equity. At Karat, we create a consistency at scale through structure and technology. So every interview is quality controlled, and our engineers have to use very clear guidelines and rubrics on how to score an interview. And they don't look at resumes beforehand. And also, our interview engineers don't make the ultimate recommendation. And this eliminates the likability bias. So the more structured the process, the lower the likelihood that you'll hire someone who does not work out. And overwhelmingly, wrong hires come from traditional backgrounds that look good on paper, and they're not coming from the underrepresented backgrounds that are being overfiltered. So let's just quickly say that the most important takeaways for now is the candidate matters more than ever in this market. One of the best ways to stand out from other hiring companies is to meet candidates where they're at. Candidates want to move fast. They're often juggling multiple potential offers, so move as quickly as they do. Second, pick your best interviewers. Data shows the interviewer has a huge impact on how candidates perceive their interview. And then third, give candidates second chances. We've all had a bad day, and when we didn't do our best, by offering the chance to do a redo, you'll let your candidates showcase their best skills and increase your hiring yield.